Denis Walsh in the Sunday Times, is with us to talk to us generally about the Munster Hurling Championship, and we'll get to that in a minute. But first, I just want to talk briefly about everybody's kind of shared reaction to this. There's a notion that some form of video assistant referee would help us here, but the fundamentals, it seems to me, are that if we could improve the quality of umpiring, then maybe we wouldn't need the video assistant referee, Denis.
You know, these referees kind of come through the ranks with the same umpires. They start at a low level, obviously club level, and they tend to have a kind of a loyal band with them who've been there the whole way through. So, you know, all kinds of games where, you know, these guys are given their time, and you know they've stayed with the referee, and when the referee kind of reaches the big time, they're loath to, you know, desert them. And so I mean, sometimes these umpires just aren't fit for the top level. I mean, you see there, we saw it even in Thurles 2 weeks ago, Joe, where Hawkeye was called into use a couple of times when Hawkeye wasn't needed at all. But you know, the umpires just didn't feel confident in their judgment. And you know, there are training courses for umpires in Croke Park. I don't believe they're compulsory, but from what I gather, they're well attended. These guys on Sunday made a huge mistake, and Brian Gavin did a very interesting column. The former referee did a very interesting column yesterday in the Irish Examiner, where you know he put it out bluntly to Alan Kelly that you know he's not going to he's potentially going to suffer in the future if he doesn't change his umpires. Yeah, and like I understand the desire for people to reward those lads who've been on the same journey as them, but at the same time, it's Derek McGrath's entire managerial career. It's this Waterford team's future in this year's All-Ireland Championship that's on the line, and that has to trump any local loyalties that a referee would have to his umpires. Yeah, I suppose that's the amateur element of the GAA writ large there. Like these are guys who have given up their time. Like umpires don't get expenses. Umpires might get a meal on Sunday. I'm not even too sure that they do. I mean, the referees get the expenses, umpires get nothing. So, like these, and yet, you know, he needs four of them, and he's going to need four of them for club games for the rest of the summer. So, like, unless the GAA kind of takes it out of referees' hands, I suppose, is really the point, where for inter-county games, they appoint other referees to be umpires. I mean, that's not. I mean, there are enough referees in the system for them to appoint referees as umpires and take it out of the referees' hands. But you know, the kind of system as it currently exists, that these guys are needed by referees 12 months of the year. So when Alan Kelly goes back to do ordinary club games, which he will do in Galway, these are the guys that he'll have with him. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's fair enough that when he's doing those games, or even if he's doing league matches or Walsh Cup matches or whatever it is, that's fair enough. But once you get to championship matches, there are definitely Division 3 and Division 4 hurling referees who no doubt would benefit from the experience of that match day, of going up and seeing what it was like at the Gaelic grounds on Saturday or Thurles on a Sunday, wherever it is, whatever those matches are, Croker for an All-Ireland final, that actually you're part of that panel and getting that experience, and that's kind of part of your step up through the grades. But look, I don't want to labour the point too much, because it was just a bit of a disaster from Waterford's perspective. You definitely feel like they were going to be able to see that game out if there hadn't been that massive shot in the arm again for Tipp just when they needed it most. Maybe to kind of come out from that and talk a little bit about the context of the entire Munster Championship so far. It feels like this might be the greatest Munster Championship of all time. Yeah, it's been fantastic. It's been absolutely terrific. And you know, like as you know, Ger, like there's a lot of mythology around Munster Championship, and especially around Munster finals. And you know, this really got under the skin of the Gerald Nan and these people on you know, those emerging teams in the mid-90s, because the Munster Championship was all about Cork and Tipp and a bit of Limerick, and that was the history of the Munster Championship, and that was the history of Munster finals, and that was kind of the basis of the mythology. But what we have at the moment are 5 really good teams at the same time. You know, there's a real equalising of standards in Munster, and then we have a system that brings out that level of, you know, that level of excellence and that level of competition, you know, which we haven't always had. I mean, Munster was often tiered, even though there's only 5 teams, it was often tiered. You know, you'd have 2, you'd have a middle team and then 2 weak teams, and that was the way it was for decades and for generations. But at the moment, that's not the way it is. There's 5 really strong teams at the same time at a really high level, and this new system, you know, has really brought it out. And like when you think of the waste for decades upon decades when we'd straight knock out and we didn't have access to all these games, and you know, a guy like Shane Ahern, who played for Waterford in the 80s and early 90s and was involved later on with John McCarthy. Jenna Hearn played 5 championship matches in his first 5 years with Waterford. That was what he got. I mean, this year, there are Waterford players who are going to play 4 games in 4 weeks. So it was an absolute waste, the way hurling was and football was set up. I think there's a really good system there now. It needs to be tweaked. Everyone is saying that. But, it's been a brilliant championship so far.
The tweaks are all fairly obvious. Give everybody a week off in the middle, stretch it out 1 extra week, just schedule it so that nobody actually plays 4 weeks in a row. Maybe have a relegation playoff between the bottom team and Munster and Leinster, and so that at least the sense of fairness is re-established, and away we go. It's like, this is definitely going to be what happens in the future. The one thing I suppose is whether or not the Munster final and Leinster final end up meaning as much year on year over a long period of time. We'll just have to wait and see for that. But
yeah, people had the same worry about whether these games would mean as much, because nobody was going to be eliminated in week 1 or week 2. But there's been tremendous drama and do or die stuff. The kind of do or die stuff that we always associate with championship. I mean, there's been cliffhangers every week. So teams were desperate not to lose, and the teams were desperate to win. So, so far, all the signs are it means as much as ever, even though it's round robin as opposed to straight knockout. And that really is the great thing about it. The obvious tweaks, that we can all see, I'm not so sure they'll happen as easily as I spoke to top official in Croke Park last week, who was heavily involved in this process. Who was really defensive about the system as it is now. There's an obvious anomaly. There's a 3-week break between the last round robin game in Leinster and the Leinster hurling final. Now that's 3 wasted weeks. So Leinster certainly could have been stretched out by at least a week. His answer to me was, well, it's clashing with football. Well, my answer to that is football and hurling now are completely different games. They're both run by the GAA, but they got different fan bases. They're different games. The Leinster football matches should not be interfering with the Leinster hurling fixtures, in my opinion. And GAA needs to get beyond that. And also, I think the hurling final needs to be pushed back towards the end of August, closer to September again. It's on the 19th of August. Push it back a week or 2, and that's where you can make your ground. It's been too much for the teams playing 3 weeks in a row. That's been obvious. Like, no team playing in week 3 has won yet.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate that there's a lot of defensiveness around these situations, as opposed to it was great, isn't it? We're nearly getting to a situation where things are perfect, as opposed to, well, no, we fixed it now, and you're going to have to live with it, even though it's not fully fixed.
I think last week, probably there's been such a kind of a chorus of sympathy for Offaly over the last week or 2, when it was obvious that they were heading for relegation, and it's like people suddenly woke up to this relegation thing, which had been agreed last September and which had been touted for months before it was agreed. But as so often in GAA, when big decisions are made, it's only when it comes close to reality that people actually start to react to it. And, there's been some crazy stuff over the last few weeks about why Offaly need to be spared. Offaly don't need to be spared. Offaly have had 20 years. Offaly have been digging this hole for themselves for 20 years. There was a sadness, obviously, in Offaly going down, but the greater sadness was that Offaly are not competitive, and they haven't been competitive against any serious team for 5 years. The last time they gave a serious team a right rattle in the championship was Kilkenny in 2013, when Ollie Baker was in charge. They were leading by 5 points at half-time, lost by 5 points. That's an outlier in their record over the last number of years. Kevin Martin has done great stuff this year, and it's unfortunate for him and the players that he's managed to motivate, but the Offaly County Board and Offaly hurling people in general have dug this hole for themselves. Offaly haven't beaten Kilkenny, Wexford or Dublin at minor level since 2005. Now, that's an unsustainable record from their point of view. And in that time, they've been beaten by Westmeath twice, they've been beaten by Carlow at minor level. So the work hasn't been done, and there has to be consequences, and this is the consequence for them.
Yeah, I think that's kind of fair enough, to be honest. A couple of quick questions about then what's going on in Munster. Is there any sense that actually awarding 3 points for a win instead of 2 for a win and 1 for a draw would actually make teams a little bit even more aggressive, going for the win in the last couple of minutes, and maybe get us out of this potential weird logjam situation which we might find ourselves in, where everybody ends up roughly on the same points?
Yeah, crikey, I don't think. Well, I certainly didn't see any of your team playing for a draw during the last couple of weeks. It's kind of impossible in hurling, really, especially when you can score from 100 yards now, or 90 yards. Yeah, I was just thinking, in the '82 World Cup, did Italy qualify from their group with 3 draws? I had that in my head going back from World Cups in the past, but yeah, I can't see Tipperary qualifying with 3 draws if they draw again on Sunday. I think it's fine. I think 2 points is fine at the moment, the way it is. I mean, I think the games have been stunning.
They have been stunning. Yeah, Italy did qualify in '82. Kevin and Google have both confirmed that to us. The situation with Waterford, right? So when you said there was 5 good teams, we weren't sure after the first game against Clare if Waterford actually could still constitute being a good team. But then you add Pádraig Mahoney back into the team, you add Austin Gleeson back into the team, and suddenly they look like a cohesive unit again. Do they have enough now to be able to pull this one out of the fire? Obviously, the suspension from this week will hopefully be not counterbalanced by Austin Gleeson getting one as well for the helmet incident. So they'll have a much stronger team heading into next week, and they'll have a good performance behind them as well. Yeah, no,
last one they were terrific. There were players there who'd been on the panel for a couple of years that were given their chance, and in some cases really grabbed it. I think what was clear as well last Sunday was what a loss Tom Devine was last summer when he went to America. I mean, he was terrific, especially in the first half. The problem they have is that they're playing a Limerick team that are absolutely flying. Limerick were really impressive, I thought, in Cork on Saturday night, and without having to play without Declan Hannon for most of the match, and they played with 14 men for 3/4 of the match. I think the big problem for Waterford is having to play Limerick on Sunday when Limerick have such momentum. It's relentless. I suppose the one thing that we thought before the Munster Championship started this year, I think everyone thought Tipp are the top team and the other 4 are inseparable. And here we are with Tipp kind of fighting for their lives and the other 4 are inseparable still. So I couldn't call it, to be honest. I was more than surprised by the performance Waterford showed last Sunday. But I'm really impressed with Limerick, the way they're going.
Yeah. What about Cork? What's the truth about them?
The truth about them is it's hard to tell. I mean, their forwards have been terrific in spells. The defence would be the worry for Cork's supporters, and that those worries seem to be allayed against Clare. They weren't an issue in the first half against Tipp. They were certainly an issue in the second half last Saturday night when the full back line was ransacked really by Seamus Flanagan primarily, with Graham Mulcahy playing a supporting role. Damien Callahan had a brilliant year last year. He was an All-Star nominee. Just hasn't had the same form in the last couple of games. Certainly last Saturday night he looked distracted. I saw photographs in the paper yesterday in Cork, and he was opening a new bar in town on Saturday night, so maybe that was on his mind. It's hard. Owen Cadigan played all the league matches and has been on the bench for the 3 championship games and hasn't come on. So people are wondering, is he fully fit or what? But if he's not fully fit, why is he on the bench? Centre back has been an issue. Tim O'Mahony played all the games there during the league, but was injured or wasn't fully fit for the first championship match. Mark Coleman played there last Saturday night, and did fine in the first half, but his distribution in the second half was unusually lax. So the Cork certainly have issues in their defence, but they have so much skill and pace, Joe. Like, they're terrific to watch in full flow, and they've been high scoring in all their 3 games. But look, it depends. A lot now will depend on Sunday for Cork. If Waterford lose against Limerick, Cork would play Waterford in the final game, and Waterford won't have anything to play for. So that really should help Cork and Thurles. But if Waterford get anything on Sunday, well, then they're fighting for their lives on Sunday week. All
right, good stuff, Denis. Thanks very much for that. And are we finally in agreement that this is the greatest Munster Hurling Championship of all time?
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, good stuff. That's Denis Walsh of the Sunday Times there.